Michigan Weekend, Show 54.
Hi there, I'm Fred Trost. I'm glad you joined us for this edition of Michigan Weekend.
And I'm Kathy Fleck, and on this edition of Michigan Weekend, we're going to get some lessons in smoking food from a real expert. Bob Musselman is a food smoking instructor from the Kalamazoo area, and he's going to give us step-by-step instructions on how to easily and inexpensively prepare smoked salmon, a real treat, and you can learn to do it.
And we'll talk about something else you can learn to do. Make a tent from scratch. I'll show you how you can take some material, use a regular sewing machine, and make your own tent. We're also going to talk with Dennis Fidzikowski from the Michigan United Conservation Clubs about up-and-coming National Hunting and Fishing Day, a real event for sportsmen of Michigan.
Michigan Weekend is brought to you in part by your one-stop shopping store, Meyer 50 Acres.
And by Michigan Out of Doors, Michigan's leading outdoor magazine.
We'll be right back, but first here's Fred with news about a sale on hunting boots at Meyer 50 Acres.
September 23rd has been declared by President Carter to be National Hunting and Fishing Day, and that gives us a good excuse to sit down and talk about hunting and fishing, how important it is to the country, how important it is to Michigan. What better person to get to come and talk to us about this than Dennis Fidzikowski, who's the Michigan United Conservation Club's field representative. And Dennis, MUCC is what, the largest sportsman's affiliated organization in the country?
Yeah, we're the largest chapter of the National Wildlife Federation, and today we have about 425 chapters throughout the state.
And of course, you're going to be busy on National Hunting and Fishing Day. Tell me about some of the activities that people are going to be able to find in shopping centers around the state.
Well, throughout the state we'll be having 16 big shows. 14 of them will be in shopping malls. And they'll consist of conservation displays, demonstrations, and skills centers where people can go and learn about the contributions of sportsmen over the years and participate in some of the recreational activities that we're involved in.
Okay, who is going to be conducting these sessions and the shows?
Most of them will be conducted by sportsmen's groups from the local area, and we'll also have other conservation organizations and recreational groups like canoeing clubs and backpackers and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts involved in our effort.
So there have been recently a lot more people involved in Hunting and Fishing Day and supporting this than just the pure hunting and fishing sportsmen's clubs.
That's true, Fred, and we've been trying to get more people involved and make others recognize how important it is that hunters and fishermen continue to support the conservation cause. Over the years, sportsmen have provided over $5 billion for conservation purposes, and it annually add almost $500 million a year to that cause.
And I think people maybe don't realize that, especially in probably the past 5 or 10 years, sportsmen's clubs have been becoming more and more involved in other conservation issues, haven't they?
That's right. In Michigan, MUCC, since its founding in 1937, has been involved in every piece of environmental or conservation legislation that's come on the scene. And most recently, the bottle bill was probably one of our biggest efforts, but we've been had a big part in the restoration of the Great Lakes, control of sea lamprey, restocking of native species, water quality now, toxic chemicals, and we've been involved in all of it. Every major conservation issue has been of concern to MUCC.
And of course, it goes without saying, MUCC has been right in the midst of many, many controversies and is every day. Why is the outdoors so controversial?
I think because as our society becomes more and more urbanized, people get further from the land and no longer relate to the realities of nature and look at some of our activities in a poor light. And I think that's what Hunting and Fishing Day is all about. We're trying to reacquaint these people with their roots and with the realities of nature and some of the recreation that those of us in the sportsman's ranks pursue.
Well, let's take a look at putting up on the screen here the different locations around the state where the Hunting and Fishing Day activities will be. These are ones that are coordinated by MUCC. I'm sure there'll be a number of smaller ones around the state as well. How important is hunting and fishing to Michigan and to MUCC?
Well, MUCC has a very diverse membership. I think our membership is roughly 80% hunters and fishermen, but hunting and fishing is very important to the state in terms of economics and just outdoor recreation for its citizens. We provide millions of dollars annually to the state coffers, and through our licenses and and 11% excise taxes on firearms and ammunition and fishing tackle, we provide the needed funds for recreation programs and wildlife restoration efforts.
A lot of people, I think, maybe might not realize that a lot of these taxes, excise taxes, have been brought on sportsmen by sportsmen themselves.
That's right, Fred. Back in 1937, it was sportsmen themselves that petitioned the federal government to institute federal excise tax on firearms and ammunition. And the Pittman-Robertson Act passed, and now we're paying the 11% tax. We've asked steadily for increases in the federal duck stamp, for increases in our hunting and fishing license monies to pay for the programs that this state needs to restore our wildlife populations.
Well, even though a lot of outdoor activities, especially hunting, might be controversial to some people, they may not want to participate in it, it certainly is an economic benefit to the state, and it's something that a lot of people enjoy, and something that MUCC is strongly behind. And if you're behind it, get out to National Hunting and Fishing Day in one of the many areas around the state and support it. Thanks for coming down, Dennis.
Thank you,
now,
Fred.
Another thing, if you're a hunter or fisherman, you're going to be interested in this. Here's a map index put out by Michigan United Conservation Clubs. You're going to be interested. Just listen. There are over 80 nautical charts of various parts of the Great Lakes, over 700 topographical maps of different areas of Michigan, some 2,500 maps of inland lakes. Details on what maps are available and how to order them are in the new map index published by the Michigan United Conservation Clubs. And this 32-page index can be yours absolutely free. Just send a self-addressed envelope along with 45 cents for postage and handling. In other words, drop in 3 first-class stamps and send to MUCC, Maps, Lansing 48909. Don't get lost this season. Send for your map index today.
Fred, I can hardly believe you made this tent all by yourself
Oh,
without Wilbur's help.
No, all by myself. And I made this a number of years ago. Actually, it was when I was in high school. But I did it myself on a sewing machine. Anybody can learn to do it, and I want to show you how. Just used an ordinary sewing machine. It doesn't have to be an extra heavy-duty job. What I bought was some water-repellent 6-ounce cotton. And you can get this from tent makers, a number of places. And I had an article that showed me how to do it, and I just went ahead and tried it. It's an easy-to-make lean-to tent. It's not really a fully enclosed tent, but it...
Your apron doesn't match your outfit.
Well, I had to jazz this up a little bit. There's the article that I read, and this comes from a Sports Afield magazine back in June of 1961. That's where the pattern was written up. You can see the shape of that tent. It doesn't look like a normal tent, and it actually isn't. But I'm going to show you how it sets up in just a few minutes. Of course, when you make your own tent, you have to make your own tent stakes, too. That's an important thing. It's a lot easier to make those things at home and put them in with the tent than it is to make them when you're out in the woods. Also, take along plenty of rope. Roll it up, and there you have a lightweight lean-to tent. Put that in the backpack. Also, if you're going to go camping overnight, you probably need a good ice chest for some refrigeration. Here's a little tip. Freeze water and milk cartons at home, and your food will stay cool. And the great thing about it is that as the ice melts, it'll stay right in the carton. It won't, drain all over your ice chest. And then when you arrive in the woods, number one priority is selecting a campsite. You want it away from swamps and wet areas. You don't want it under treacherous limbs at least, but you might want to use a limb for this type of tent, this lean-to. You can stretch a rope between 2 trees, but with this lean-to, it's better to put a ridge pole between 2 trees and about 5-6 feet off the ground. Now, this is the backbone of the Whelen lean-to. It's called the Whelen lean-to because Colonel Townsend Whelen designed it back in the 1920s. Now, with your homemade tent stakes, you can set up in a jiffy. And you'll want to flip the canopy back. See the canopy hanging down there on the lean-to? Flip that back, hang a stick right on those little tape tabs there that you've sewn in there, and you can use that to hang wet socks on, your washcloth. Now, for a ground cloth, you don't have to go to a lot of great expense either. I've always used old shower curtains. A lot of people throw them away, but they make great ground cloths. And an air mattress is one way to go. You could also go for a foam pad. Well, look at that kitty. Sure looks young, doesn't he? Now, one thing on air mattresses, a lot of people blow them up too tight. That's fully inflated. You don't want to blow up an air mattress like that. because it'll be almost like sleeping on hard ground. So let a little air out, you'll sink down just a bit. Okay, I know what you're wondering. I know. How can you camp in an open tent like that in the summer in Michigan where we have mosquitoes?
You can't.
Well, yeah, you can with great discomfort, or you can do something about it. You can take, well, of course, mosquito repellent. You can slap them, you can put repellent on, but Colonel Townsend Welland designed this tent with the reality in mind that there are bugs, so there's some little tape tabs inside that are sewn to the roof of the tent. You tie what is called a mosquito bar. A mosquito bar is like a little pup tent, except it's made out of mosquito netting, and that hangs right inside the lean-to. Another thing you notice about the lean-to, the sides actually come out. They don't go straight down into the ridgepole, they're splayed out forward, and that helps keep the rain off. Now for a fire, especially in the fall, a fire is essential to keep this tent warm. There's no way to retain heat in it, so you're going to want a fire nearby. You want to clear out an area maybe 8-10 feet in diameter. Now here's an idea that's especially useful with this. I'm using an old piece of metal there that I found, a makeshift piece of metal to reflect the heat of the fire back into the tent. I've also done it successfully with some logs just stacked up, green aspen logs. And of course, milk cartons are a great way to start a fire. They have the wax on them and they start right away.
Use the milk carton after your ice is melted.
Right, after your ice is melted. It makes I'm sure if Daniel Boone would have had milk cartons available, he would have used those to start fires. All you need is a small fire, if you build it right, to cook on and to reflect heat into the tent. Now, also, if you have a fire going in front of your tent, the smoke is going to keep the insects away. There's another advantage of that reflector that goes behind the tent, or the fire, and it'll cause the smoke to go straight up. Now here's a little tip. Before you cook over a fire, you might want to coat the bottom of your pan with soap. And you can cook on it and it'll be turned black from the soot. Well, there we save some dishwashing. Just eat your food right off the stick. But it's surprising that the black soot comes right off the bottom of the pan when you put soap on beforehand. And there we are. That's the Townsend Welland Lean-To. A very inexpensive tent, an awful lot of fun to camp in. I've spent many enjoyable evenings in there, looking at the sunset. As the sun goes down, you can really have an enjoyable time. A different way to camp, more rustic, roughing it. By the way, here's the mosquito bar. Mm-hmm. See, that fits inside. These you can get in an Army surplus store.
Now you're going to tell us how to make this tent.
How to make the tent. I just happen to have right here an article, not from the 1961 Sports Field, but from the October 1978 Michigan Out of Doors. There's the dimensions for the tent, an article here that explains how to make it, some of the details, and that's something that you'll probably want to pick up if you're not a subscriber, and tells how to do it. Not much expense at all.
Michigan Out of Doors magazine.
Right. Now you can see here by looking at some of my stitchery, if we can get a shot on this, it isn't the most beautiful thing in the world, right?
Well, it does the job.
It does the job, that's right. And there's really something to be said for somebody who wants a do-it-yourself project. You can really feel good camping in a tent you've made yourself. We'll be right back with more Michigan Weekend and a special food smoking recipe right after these messages. Anytime we have a guest on Michigan Weekend to talk about food, especially something like smoked fish, he's got to be a very special guest. And we do have a special guest with us indeed, Bob Musselman, who is a food smoking expert. He teaches food smoking classes, fishing classes, all sorts of things down in the Kalamazoo, Battle Creek area. Bob, you have here, you've said that with a very simple smoker, some hickory chips, we can make some smoked salmon.
We can do the whole thing with that, Fred.
Okay, we're going to do that. Of course, the hard part, I found this past weekend, the hard part is getting a hold of the salmon. Oh, my luck was bum, but you had a little better luck a few weeks ago. Why don't you tell us here about how you go about preparing a salmon to smoke?
Okay, I'm cutting up a jack salmon there, Fred. That's probably about a 3-pound fish. We're cutting it into steaks.
Now, is a smaller one better than a bigger one?
No, it isn't. It just happens to be the size I had. I would prefer to have a larger fish.
Mm-hmm.
And we're cutting it up there, and then we're going to be putting it into the brine in a minute.
So you don't have to take the skin off or debone it, anything like that?
No, we don't. We don't even scale it, Fred.
But you do clean it?
We do clean it.
Okay, so it's cut into sections, what are those, about 1.5 to 2 inches thick?
About that, yes. I don't like to get them any thicker than that. It takes too long to smoke them then.
Now, what is the brine comprised of?
What I'm doing there is making brine, and that's water with some salt in it. We use, to every quart of water, we use half a cup of salt and a half a cup of sugar. And
White sugar or brown sugar?
We can use either one. I believe I'm using brown sugar there, but we can use either one, Fred.
Well, let's see, I think we got a mix. Is this a mixture?
So that's sort of a mixture there, yes. I had some white sugar and I put a little bit brown sugar in with it.
Would it change the flavor if you use just one?
It won't change the flavor, but the brown sugar will give it a golden cast.
Oh,
It'll look better to eat.
oh.
Won't taste any better, but it looks better.
What does the brining, why do you do the brining before you smoke the salmon?
Brining injects some flavor into it. It injects a salt and a sweet flavor. The main reason for brining is it preserves the fish.
How long do you leave the fish in the brine?
I leave salmon in about 12 to 14 hours.
Do you have to have the brine at any particular temperature? Should it be warm or cold or what?
It's a good idea in the summer to put it in the refrigerator because we don't want that brine going stale. In the winter time, it wouldn't make any difference. You could have it outdoors or in the basement, for instance, if it's cool enough down there. But in the hot summer, I would recommend that a person, at least when you're doing salmon, 12, 14 hours, that you have it in the refrigerator.
Now, what is the difference now between the fish that comes out of the brine and the fish before?
Well, when it comes out of the brine, it has salt injected all the way into the very center of it, Fred. And you can see right there, I'm rinsing the brine off so that there aren't any salt crystals on the outside. We don't rinse it thoroughly. We just give it a quick rinse, and then we dry it off with paper towels.
If you rinsed it too much, would you take the salt out?
You sure would, and you'd be putting fresh water back in. You don't want to do that.
So just very, very quickly, quick
Yes,
rinse.
that's right, a very quick rinse.
Then what is the next step?
Okay, you just saw what I was doing there with paper towels. I was patting the fish dry. We want to dry it out. And now I'm putting it on the racks. It's going to set on the racks for about 45 minutes drying.
Is that an important step? Could you pop it in the smoker right now, or?
You could, but then you won't have the pellicle form, and this is a good time to talk about the pellicle, Fred. The pellicle forms after about 45 minutes, and that's a shiny coating on the outside of the fish. It's sticky to the touch. And when it's sticky to the touch, you'll know that it's ready to put into the smoker.
And how far ahead do you have to start the smoker?
Oh, about 5 minutes. About 5 minutes, and it'll be smoking, and then we put the fish in the smoker.
Should you preheat a smoker, or can you put it in cold?
It's a good idea to preheat it because then you'll be timing it. Timing is quite important here.
Now, is the pellicle formed on that? That's been sitting about 45 minutes?
Yes, it has. I touched it there, and it was sticky, so it's all set to go into the smoker now.
So the smoking doesn't preserve it, the brining does?
The brining and the smoking preserve it. There are some things that we don't brine. For instance, cheese we don't brine, and the smoking preserves it. So the combination of smoking and brining preserve it.
Okay, so here we go, taking the salmon, putting it into the smoker for about how long?
I put it in about 6 to 6.5 hours, Fred, and then it comes out and I put it in the oven about 20 minutes at 350 degrees, and then she's ready to eat.
Well, I've heard that some people smoke it for maybe 12 hours or so.
I would rather smoke it a shorter period of time and then put it in the oven at 350 degrees to make sure that it's cooked thoroughly.
So there is a chance of what? What's the problem with just smoking it?
Oh, there would be a chance, a possibility of botulism, and we just want to eliminate that possibility.
Just to play it extra safe.
That's right.
Okay, well, before we get into the salmon here, which we have in the smoker, the chips that you use hickory chips for the salmon that we're going to taste?
Yes. That's from a plain old hickory tree. We don't use the bark. They debark the tree and then make it just about like sawdust.
Well, they sell a wide variety of chips. Cherry, apple, a lot of different things. Does it really give a different flavor to the...
Yes, it
what you
does.
smoke?
It's best to use hickory for fish. For game, like pheasants and game hen, we'll use apple. And for red meats, we use cherry.
Well, you're going to be back with us to do some game recipes yet this fall, smoking. But let's get in here, Bob. Find out. Kathy, why don't you come over here? Let's taste some of this. Here it is. In fact, this is some of the salmon that you...
Smells good.
Try this out. Now, Bob, while
Well, this is a
Kathy's...
jack salmon, Kathy.
While she's tasting that, you have some food
might be
smoking
some-
classes coming up in the Kalamazoo area.
I sure do in November at Portage Adult Education. And then in November also at Lakeview High School in Battle Creek.
Well, I'm sure people are not going to want to miss those classes in that area of the state. Also, this recipe for smoked salmon by Bob Musselman is a part of the fall 1978 recipe booklet, which is available at any Meyer Thrifty Acres store, and it'll be available also through Michigan Out of Doors magazine. How is it, Kathy?
Oh, it's delicious. It's indescribable. You're
Well.
going to taste some.
I'm going to get into this in just a second, but first of all, let's talk about some specials in the sporting goods department at Meyer, which just happens to be also a special on smokers. I really wish I could give an accurate fishing forecast, but I tell you, it's just been so spotty in some places when it should have been great. One thing I know, the New Buffalo area, Benton Harbor, St. Joe, has just been fantastic for really the whole summer. And we expected it all up in the northern areas we'd have the hot salmon fishing. Well, it's probably happening by the time you hear this broadcast, but up until now, it's sure been hard to predict. Kathy?
Well, Fred, there are a number of festivals this weekend for the family. The 14th through the 16th, the Harvest Festival in Scottville. The 14th through the 17th, the Grape and Wine Festival in Paw Paw. This is always a big event. The 16th and the 17th, an Oktoberfest in Copper Harbor in the UP, and also in the UP, the annual Walleye Jamboree at Manistee Lakes at Curtis.
Well, also, you duck hunters, remember that this is the month when the Ducks Unlimited banquets are being held around the state. In the Lansing chapter, Ingham County Conservation League, I'm going to be emceeing that banquet. That's on Wednesday the 20th, so I want to see all you mid-Michigan duck hunters there raise money for the ducks.
Our sponsors hope that you can get outdoors this weekend because it's a great place to be.
We'll see you next week.